You know that feeling when you first move into a new place? At first, you're just hyper aware that it isn't really yours. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Like, you're terrified of breaking anything.
Right. You're careful not to scuff the hardwood floors.
Hmm.
You hesitate for, I don't know, 10 minutes before putting a single nail in the wall to hang a picture. Mostly because you're already stressed about the security deposit.
Yeah, you treat the space with this very specific kind of reverence. It's the psychology of borrowing. You are acutely aware that someone else holds the actual deed, and you are just passing through.
Exactly. Until you aren't. Give it 6 months, maybe a year. You paint an accent wall. You plant some tomatoes in the backyard. You fix a squeaky cabinet hinge yourself. And suddenly this very subtle, almost invisible psychological shift happens.
You stop thinking of it as a space you're just borrowing.
Yeah. You start feeling deep in your bones like it fundamentally belongs to you.
Which, I mean, it's a very natural human tendency. We blur the line between stewardship and ownership almost without realizing we're doing it. We take what we are merely managing and we begin to claim it as our own creation.
And that psychological shift, that blurring of the lines, is exactly what happens in one of the most intense, heavily loaded stories in human history. I'm talking about the parable of the tenants. Welcome to the deep dive.
It's great to be here.
Today, you and I are digging into a stack of profound textual analyses of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. We're figuring out how a story about ancient farming is actually, well, a brutal mirror held up to the human ego.
It really is.
So, our mission for you listening today is clear. We are going to decipher two massive symbols here, the vineyard and the cornerstone. We'll explore what they reveal about our own arrogance, the absolutely staggering patience of God, and the unavoidable reality of divine authority. Okay, let's unpack this. To understand where this story is going, we have to look at how it starts.
Right, so it starts with a very familiar scenario for the ancient world. Jesus sets the scene with a landowner who plants a beautiful vineyard, leases it out to some tenants, and goes away on a long journey.
Just a standard business arrangement back then, right?
Totally. To a first-century audience, absentee landlords were incredibly common. Wealthy individuals would buy up land, set up all the agricultural infrastructure, and hire locals to work it in exchange for a portion of the harvest.
But obviously, looking at the sources we have, this isn't just a story about ancient economics.
Far from it. It's a profound metaphor for the cosmos. The landowner represents God the Father, the ultimate creator, and the one who holds the actual deed to reality.
Okay.
And the vineyard is the kingdom of God, or more broadly, it's the spiritual responsibilities, the resources, and the profound blessings entrusted to humanity.
So it's basically a turnkey operation. The landowner does all the heavy lifting, planting, building the walls, setting up the wine press, and then just hands the keys over to the tenants.
That's a crucial point. The tenants didn't build the vineyard. They were just brought in to steward it. Historically, in the immediate context of the story, Jesus was pointing directly at the religious leaders of his day. They are the ones tasked with managing the spiritual life of the people.
Right, but our sources point out that the metaphor goes much wider than that.
It does. If you strip away the historical context and look at the underlying psychology, the tenants represent anyone given responsibility, life, or resources by God. That includes you. That includes all of us.
I mean, think about your own life for a second. How often do you look at your career, your natural talents, your bank account, or even your family and think, I built this. This is all mine.
Oh, all the time.
It's like that exact mindset. We move into the fully furnished mansion of our lives and totally forget we didn't buy the furniture.
And that forgetfulness becomes dangerous when harvest time arrives, because the landowner is owed his share of the fruit. In the metaphor, this fruit isn't grapes. It's a life lived in accordance with the landowner's will.
Like righteousness, justice, faith.
Exactly. Righteousness, justice, and faithfulness. So the landowner sends his servants, which represent the prophets and spiritual messengers throughout history, to collect.
And this is where I usually get tripped up reading this story, because the escalation makes zero logical sense.
How so?
Well, the servants show up to collect the rent, and the tenants don't just dodge their calls. They don't just hide behind the curtains pretending nobody is home. They beat one servant, kill another, and stone a third.
Yeah.
Like, why? If I'm renting an apartment and the property manager asks for the check, I don't throw him off the balcony. What is driving this extreme violence?
It's what we call the illusion of ownership. The tenants aren't just trying to save a few bucks on rent. They have convinced themselves that they can sever the connection with the landowner entirely and keep the vineyard for themselves.
Wow.
Yeah, they want the produce, the security, and the status of the vineyard, but they violently reject the authority of the one who actually provided it.
It's pure ego. We look at the time and resources we've been given, and we just demand absolute autonomy over them.
And every time a messenger arrives to remind them, hey, you are just a steward here, it threatens that ego. So they eliminate the threat, they kill the prophets. The rebellion reaches an absolute breaking point.
Which brings us to the craziest part of the story. If I am the landowner and my property managers are being murdered by my tenants, I am not sending more property managers.
No, you'd call the authorities.
Exactly. I am calling the police. I am sending an army. I am reclaiming my property by absolute overwhelming force. But this landowner doesn't do that. He looks at this violent, hostile mob, and he decides to send his own son.
He says they will respect my son.
Which, I gotta be honest, sounds incredibly naive, borderline irresponsible, really. Why would he think that sending his child into a literal murder zone is a good strategy?
I know, it only sounds naive until you understand the ancient legal system they were operating under. This is the mechanism from the sources that makes the whole story click into place.
Okay, lay it on me.
In ancient Near Eastern property law, if an absentee landowner was presumed dead and his heir was also killed, the land became legally ownerless.
Wait.
Yeah. Under those specific laws, the people currently occupying the land, meaning the tenants, would have the first legal right to claim it.
Oh, wow. So they weren't just being mindlessly violent, they were exploiting a legal loophole.
Precisely. When they see the son coming, they say, "This is the heir. Come, let's kill him and take his inheritance."
Yeah.
They think the landowner is dead or never coming back. If they wipe out the only heir, the deed legally passes to them. The illusion of ownership becomes permanent reality.
That changes everything. It completely transforms the tenants from these cartoon villains into, like, calculating, terrifying opportunists. But it also changes how we view the landowner. He knows the danger.
He knows exactly what he's risking.
Yeah. What's fascinating to me is how this part of the story draws incredibly sharp lines between God the Father and Jesus the Son.
What's fascinating here is how distinct their roles actually are, despite sharing the same ultimate mission. Our sources point out three distinct ways the text separates them. First, look at the flow of authority. God is the unseen landowner holding the ultimate authority. Jesus is the emissary.
Right. He doesn't show up claiming to be the original owner who built the walls.
Exactly. He operates entirely on the authority of his Father. He is representing the Father's interests, not a separate rogue agenda. The sender versus the sent.
And there's a massive shift in identity, too. Sending a servant is one thing. The prophets were, for all intents and purposes, employees of the estate.
Yeah.
But sending the Son, that separates Jesus from every other spiritual messenger in history. He is of the exact same family, the same nature as the owner. The vulnerability of that is just staggering.
It is the ultimate vulnerability. And that brings up the third distinction, the starkest difference between the two, which is their experience of the rebellion. The landowner orchestrates this overarching plan from a distance. He feels the grief of rejection, certainly, but it is the son who physically enters the vineyard. The son is the one who steps directly into the hostility, the dirt, and the blood.
He absorbs the violence. The story gets very specific, noting that they threw him outside the vineyard and killed him.
Which is a direct foreshadowing. Just as the son is dragged out of the vineyard to be murdered, Jesus is ultimately taken outside the city gates of Jerusalem to be crucified. The Father entrusts the world to humanity, but it's the Son who actually enters the physical world to reclaim it, taking the full brunt of human rebellion in the process.
So if you put yourself in the shoes of those tenants for a second, in their twisted, calculating logic, they think they've won. The heir is dead, the loophole is closed, the property is officially theirs. They think the story ends there.
But it does.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Instead of just announcing their immediate punishment, Jesus executes this sudden, deliberate pivot in the conversation. We were just talking about grapes, soil, and farming, and out of nowhere, Jesus quotes Psalm 118. He switches entirely to an architectural metaphor about masonry. So what does this all mean?
It's a brilliant rhetorical trap. He shifts from diagnosing the core problem, which is humanity's violent, ego-driven rejection of God's authority, to revealing God's ultimate, unshakable solution. The farming metaphor exposed the complete failure of the old system. The architectural metaphor introduces the foundation of the new one.
Let's decode the masonry then, because ancient building practices were a lot different than, just pouring concrete today.
Ancient builders were meticulous. They had to be. Before a stone was ever placed in a foundation, it was ruthlessly inspected. If a stone was misshapen, if it didn't perfectly match the exact geometry of the blueprint, or if it had even a minor structural flaw, it was immediately tossed aside into a scrap heap.
Okay, so in this new metaphor, who are the builders?
The builders represent the exact same people as the tenants, the spiritual leaders tasked with constructing God's kingdom.
And Jesus is the rejected stone.
Yes. The builders examined him and decided he was completely useless for their project.
It's exactly like a modern hiring manager with a very strict, uncompromising rubric. The religious leaders had a specific blueprint in their minds for what the Messiah was supposed to look like.
They wanted a conquering king.
Exactly, a political warlord who was going to ride in, slaughter the Romans, and reestablish their political dominance. They look at Jesus, and what do they see? A guy riding a donkey, hanging out with tax collectors, telling people to actively love their enemies. He doesn't fit their resume at all. So, into the scrap heap he goes.
But this is where the ultimate divine reversal happens. Human judgment looks at the son and tosses him into the rubble as a failure. But God steps into that exact scrap heap, picks up the very stone humanity threw away, and makes it the cornerstone.
And we have to clarify what a cornerstone actually is, because today it's just like a decorative plaque with the year a building was finished. But back then it was everything, wasn't it?
It was the absolute anchor of the structure. The cornerstone was the first, the largest, and the most structurally critical stone laid in the foundation. It bore the immense weight of the walls, but more importantly, it determined the exact alignment, the angle, and the geometry of every single other stone in the building.
So by making the rejected stone the cornerstone, God isn't just salvaging a bad situation, he is constructing an entirely new spiritual house.
Exactly. The old system, the corrupted vineyard, is completely left behind. God's greatest victory emerges directly from what humanity considered an utter, humiliating defeat. The tenants thought they had permanently discarded him, but God makes him the unshakable anchor of a new reality.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because once that cornerstone is laid by the landowner, it becomes the center of everything. You cannot bypass it.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Jesus isn't just dropping a nice architectural metaphor and walking away. He attaches two massive, severe Old Testament warnings to this cornerstone concept. He is issuing an absolute ultimatum. The cornerstone is immovable, and you have to interact with it.
You can't just politely walk around it in the dark. You are going to collide with it.
And he outlines exactly what happens when you do. The first consequence he describes is falling on the stone, which draws from the prophet Isaiah in chapter 8. This represents the present daily collision between human pride and the reality of Christ. The warning is clear. Anyone who falls on this stone will be broken to pieces.
Which, I mean, sounds terrifying. Being broken to pieces does not sound like a positive spiritual experience. But think about what it actually means to be broken in this context. It's not about being destroyed. It's about the ego being dismantled. Think of a wild horse.
That is the perfect way to visualize it.
A wild horse has incredible power, but it has to be broken to be ridden. If you experience a positive breaking, it means the breaking of a stubborn, independent will. When our human agendas collide with Jesus' teachings, the call to die to ourselves, to submit completely, to love the people who hate us, we trip over it. It breaks our pride. But that breaking leads to humility.
Right.
It leads to a surrendered life where that raw strength is finally aligned with a master.
But there is a negative breaking, too. If someone violently resists the reality of the cornerstone, if they fight against that true alignment, they just end up shattering their own lives in the process of that resistance. They become bitter, frustrated, and ruined by their own refusal to yield. That is a present, ongoing reality. People are stumbling over that stone right now.
But then Jesus shifts from the present to the future. He introduces a second action, and it sounds infinitely more severe. He talks about the stone falling on you.
This is the ultimate severity. Here, Jesus is invoking a prophecy from the book of Daniel, chapter 2. In that text, an ancient king has a terrifying dream of a towering, giant statue representing all the great human empires and systems of power.
Right, the head of gold, chest of silver, all that.
Exactly. And in the dream, a rock cut out of a mountain, not by human hands, strikes the statue. It completely crushes it into dust that just blows away in the wind. And then that single rock grows into a mountain that fills the entire earth.
So if falling on the stone is about us stumbling over our own ego today, the stone falling on us is what?
It is the future, final judgment. It means that rejecting the emissary doesn't make him disappear. Those who refuse to be broken in humility right now, those who cling desperately to the illusion of ownership and try to keep the vineyard for themselves, will eventually face the inescapable, crushing weight of his authority later. When that stone falls, the giant statue of human ego, human empires, and human rebellion is turned to dust.
He shuts every single loophole. The tenants thought they had figured out a clever legal trick to maintain control of the vineyard without submitting to the landowner. And by shifting to this unshakable architectural imagery, Jesus is looking them dead in the eye and saying it is impossible.
He is the cornerstone. You can fight against him and shatter yourself. You can try to ignore him and ultimately be crushed by the reality of the kingdom he's bringing, but you cannot, under any circumstances, maintain control. It strips away all of our pretenses and forces a decision.
It really takes you on a journey. We started with this incredibly relatable, sneaky psychology of moving into an apartment and suddenly believing we own the place. We watched that illusion of ownership escalate into absolute rebellion in the vineyard. We saw the irrational, vulnerable patience of a landowner who sends his own son into the violence. And we ended up staring at this immovable, unavoidable reality of a foundational cornerstone that determines the geometry of the entire universe.
It's a massive shift in perspective.
It really does force a decision. And that brings me back to where we started, thinking about building our lives, claiming our spaces, and hanging our pictures. I want to leave you with a thought to mull over long after you finish listening today.
Go for it.
We talked about how a cornerstone dictates the exact perfect alignment of every single other stone in a building. If the cornerstone is perfectly true and perfectly square, then every other stone has to be aligned to its standard. So what does it actually feel like when an individual stone, meaning a person's life, your life, realizes they've been building their foundation slightly off-center this whole time? When you finally collide with that true cornerstone, how painful or perhaps how incredibly liberating is the process of being chipped away, reshaped, and realigned to finally fit the landowner's original blueprint. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning, keep aligning, and most importantly, keep learning.